Welcome to Jewish Museum Milwaukee's Conversation Starters. My name is Ellie Gettinger, and I'm the Education Director at Jewish Museum Milwaukee. Today, I am delighted to be talking with Moshe Katz about a really interesting collection that he has. This is a collection that he has been developing over years, and it's not a collection that he publicly puts out into the universe that he has. And so today we have a really unique opportunity to talk about what's the nature of holding on to things that are racist or anti-Semitic, and where should those things be in the universe? Where do those things operate, especially in this particularly challenging moment around race, anti-Semitism, and all sorts of different broad issues impacting our society. Moshe, if you don't know him, is the chair of the board of the Milwaukee Jewish Federation. He is a committed philanthropist. There's pretty much no position in the community that he hasn't held. He's a businessman, a family man, and it's always a pleasure to talk with Moshe, who on top of all those things is also a really accomplished educator. So without further ado, let's jump into this collection. And what the way I became acquainted with this collection was through a series of two portfolios that you had gotten by a Polish artist named Stanislaw Togol. And Togol, similar to our exhibit right now, To Paint is to Live, has a little bit of a caricature, cartoonish aesthetic. Can you describe these pieces and then kind of how they came into your holding?
So these are two folios of product created literally in the middle of the Holocaust, middle of World War II, middle of Shoah, with a perspective that is very bent from his perspective as a Polish-Russian kind of an influence and very communist-centric. One folio was very politically centered and the second folio is very horror centric, and it's horror, I mean, because it really focuses on what's actually happening in death camps. It is shocking. It is an extremely powerful piece to look at. Both of them are very challenging. The first one, though, is so mocking of the politics that it becomes almost weird slapstick. It's very uncomfortable to look at, but at the same time, it's politics, so it's less impactful. When you look at the one that's actually on the human side and dealing with suffering of people, that's a totally different story. And I found them in a very strange place. My family and I spend some time in Door County every summer, and we make it a habit to stop at antique stores on the way to and from. And I've been antiquing for years. It's just one of those things I like doing. And I have found that in many of these antique stores, there are awkward collections. These two particular folios were in a Door County antique shop in a glass display case where one was open to, and I'm sorry to say, I don't remember which image it was open to, but it was one of those things where I went and looked and then kept looking at it thinking, what am I really looking at here? And I asked the curator of the place to come over and he showed me these two pieces and I thought, I have to buy these. And that's kind of like an urge that's been happening to me a lot over the years, is that I have to buy these things because they need to be someplace else other than an antique shop. And they need to be someplace else other than an antique shop because the two alternatives could be even worse. It could go to a racist collection. It can go to an anti-Semitic collection. It can go to a whatever the horrible person is will be buying this for their own selfish reasons, or worse, for an organization's reasons to continue promoting that. Or in my case, and in some of the other cases that are out there, it actually goes to an educational place. It goes to a space where somebody can use it for educational purposes. So I bought this knowing that what I'm about to do with it is buy it and then gift it. Gift it to, in our case, the Jewish Museum Milwaukee. Especially since I knew that there were two spaces there, both Jewish Museum Milwaukee and the Holocaust Education Resource Center, that could use these folios for their own purposes. And
we've used these for educational purposes. We've used these with school groups. We just did a teacher training with them. They are quite bizarre. And I imagine if you're in an antique store in Door County and suddenly there's an image of Hitler confronting you, you're like, why is Hitler in this antique store? And who are the people that are going to see this picture of Hitler and not see the satire and not see the kind of sense of despair that Togol is putting out there, and instead uses it as a way of glorifying the Holocaust?
There are antique shops, unfortunately, are known to have these kind of collections in them. Some of them come from households where, grandma died and nobody knew grandma, or maybe nobody knew grandpa. And they go through their things, and this is the stuff they find. And actually, they don't go through the things. Very often, it's actually just given in bulk to these antique shops, and they go through it and find what's valuable, what's not. What's so strange, by the way, though, is that this could be right next to a Fred Flintstone, 1965 glass that was used for like somebody taking their vitamins every day. That's literally sitting in the same glass curio could be right there, right next to it. So it's just the irony of having these two things juxtaposed one over the other is just so strange. That's why actually searching for these in antique shops is always so exciting. It's also sometimes a very strange kind of introduction, right? How do you ask an antique dealer, do you have these things in your possession? And oftentimes they will immediately say no, until you actually start walking through their place and you find out, well, here's one, and there's another one, and here's another one. And don't forget, oftentimes antique shops have individual, the antique shop may be owned by one person, but in fact, there's collections of a multitude of different people inside the space. That's what this was. This was a space that was owned by one particular individual, and he was just selling through this antique shop, so on consignment, so to speak.
So these pieces, the Toggle pieces, have that he had a clear perspective, and it is actually, despite the fact that it portrays Hitler and Goebbels and all of these people, it actually is very anti-Nazi. It's an easy thing to show. Some of the other pieces in your collection are a lot harder because they're racist by intent. And they're pieces, and I'm going to put out a trigger warning right now as we're showing images. These are pieces that could trigger some strong reactions from our viewers. They're not parv. So how is it the sort of thing that you just happen across them and you see them, or you've become you kind of note what you're looking for at this point and you know where to look?
It's like the person who buys a car for the first time and then realizes how many cars like his or hers are around them. You never really noticed that car before until you see, oh my God, I've also got a green one just like that one. That's what this is. So there's a certain heightened sensitivity, a spidey sense that's actually there, but once you start doing this. But I happened down this road, and I want to give credit where credit is due because of my father. My father had and it hung in his office for as long as I can remember, a slave ownership document. And I remember as a child looking at this thing and reading it and just being baffled by it. How could a human own a human? And why would my dad have this? And I've asked him that question through multiple stages of my life, and his answer was always the same thing, and his answer was because we're human. And because sometimes we just do things that are so grossly wrong and so grossly evil. That's why, and we would do it year after year at a Passover Seder, where if we really believe that in every generation a person has to see themselves as if they came out of Egypt, then understanding the role of slavery in our lives as a Jew becomes part and parcel of what we are. And as the educator in me, just the same exact way as I saw those pieces of this Polish perspective on the World War II, or the Shoah, do I not have that same obligation to do it someplace else? So it started with that in my background, so that when I started seeing these, when I would be curio shopping at these antique shops, and I started seeing more and more of these racist, in some case, really graphic, really horrible pieces, and I started collecting them, and I started realizing, again, like that, they need to be someplace else. They shouldn't be in an antique place. They need to be in a space where, if done well and if done right, they can teach about some of the darkest parts of American history that unfortunately are still plaguing us until today.
So, and to your dad's point, this idea, I think most of us think, well, having a slave certificate on your wall, how harrowing that is. But he sees it as a way of saying, okay, this is a way that I really feel that commandment in every generation, you should feel as though you were redeemed, that was kind of going back to that. As you are buying these things, do you kind of feel this constant sense of discomfort, like even just handing over money for them?
The fact that these products are gaining value is very strange, right? I mean, the fact that, and that there's a reproduction market. In other words, not only is there product out there that is in fact from the 1800s or the 1900s, but in fact that there is product now made in the late 1900s, early 2000s that are replicas of being sold as originals, is horrifying. Is really, I mean, because you know it's being made for not the collectors like me who are trying to do something educationally positive about this, but in fact are being sold to or made for the real racists that still live amongst us, for the organizations that still love to promote this kind of ideology and thought and belief. I'll remember, let me show, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, what role do you think, these pieces are from all sorts of different things, from kind of advertising? A lot of the pieces that you have are advertising, but some of them are kind of like just the sorts of souvenirs that someone would get, I assume, at like a fair or something like that. Do you have any sense of the provenance of the pieces that you have? And if there's any one specific you were about to say, let me get into.
It is a tin that has this African-American woman's face on it, actually an African's face on it, not an African-American, because it's intentionally not supposed to be that. And the nappiness of the hair is supposed to be like that same feeling of what tobacco would be. That is just horrible. It's despicable. And if I'm not mistaken, it's a Wisconsin product. Those are the kind of things that I needed to have one of those in my collection. And then I found it in a garage at my parents' after my father was gone. And when I asked my mom about it, she said, well, yeah, that was the same part of Dad's collection for that other piece. There's a patent number on these. Somebody sitting in a US patent office gave it a number. Somebody spent time cataloging this as a piece that's being registered, trademarked as a product to be sold and distributed in our systems. That's vile. I still get the chills just thinking that that was something that you could actually walk into the store at one point and buy as a trinket. What's so horrible?
And that it had something so unique about it that it was patented.
Correct.
That it's something
Correct.
that was so different about this, that it not only was a bank, this is a bank that had a specific patent applied.
This particular piece works by, actually, there's a hand you put the coin on, and in back there's a little trigger you pull, and the hand shoots the penny or the quarter or whatever into the mouth of the bank. I decided to use this one day for a teaching moment at the Milwaukee Jewish Day School. And it was for Martin Luther King was actually on a day where we remembered Martin Luther King. And I thought, well, this is an opportunity. And I put it on top of the dais, and it was in a room full of 8th graders only. And I thought, well, when they come into the room, they're going to see this, and that's not what I want to have. I want to have an impactful, oh my gosh, first moment with them. So I had to cover it. And the only thing there that I could cover with, that I looked around me, was a talit. And I had a long pause, because there's nothing holy about this that I could do that with. And I thought, yeah, there is. This is an educational moment. Educational moments are holy moments. It's a time when you're actually about to teach something that hopefully will change the way these kids look at the world, hopefully forevermore. That we were reduced to such a point of such hatred and such animosity towards a group, or in this case, truly baseless hatred, that this is something that we actually created. And how far it must have come from having that bank for that purpose to having a man standing and telling us about a dream that he once had. And to share that with them was that kind of a paradigm shift that I think they really got. And in fact, when the talit was unveiled and this was beneath it, I got that shock from the kids. And since then, I've actually asked some of those kids, they're now grown adults, what they thought about that particular moment. And many of them said it was the educational moment of their lives, where they actually look back and say, that is one of those things I will look back in 20 years from now and say, remember when Don Katz brought in that moment? And then I looked back and said, that was something worth buying. Because had it stayed in that antique shop, who else, who knows where it would have gone to? And it's not the heroic side to me as much as it was for the educational opportunity for the kids, right? There is a side to this that I look at this collection every so often, I just want to cover it. because it is just so awful. But there's another side to it also that I think just when we think we're getting better, you got to look at things like this to kind of remind us of how far we still have to go.
And looking at kind of this broad sweeping, this kind of ephemera, what are the ways, clearly they're physical stereotypes. Are there also kind of other ways in which, and I know a lot of people in our community are reading the book Caste, that it reinforces kind of the caste system that you can see as through this collection?
So one of the pieces that's there, and I know I sent it to you properly with a photo because it's just such a bizarre one. There's a plastic alligator that has a pencil that fits into the mouth of the alligator. And the tip of the pencil is the head of a black man. If you pull the pencil out and you lay it next to the piece, you'll note that it says Japan on the pencil. This was made in Japan and brought here. So we exported a racist sentiment to be created in Japan for it to be brought back to the States. Now, this is also possible it was created because it's unfortunate this is not a dated product. So I don't know this for certain, but this may be from a certain time period of Japan's history that's also kind of interesting for America's history with Japan, because it could be pre-World War II, which is a fascinating time period to think about it. It had to have been probably pre-World War II. So if you think about that, what that meant is think about that, again, it's not just racist, right? There's so many layers of this, of what this is really all about. So there are, the answer to the question is yes. There are so many other places that this really does cover beyond what it talks about in Caste, right? Is all these different layers of, or that there's a couple of the postcards where there is now a next level of educated Black person who's mocking the behavior of the less educated Black person in the white person's postcard, right? The person who's buying these postcards is actually touring southern parts of the United States and is taking these postcards and mailing them back home. Look what I found when I was in Georgia, wherever they were. And it is of this weird dialogue between the different layers of Black American society at the time.
Really reinforcing that hierarchy of, colorism and education and aspirational difference in all of those pieces. And then also from that pencil, the alligator and pencil, that it reinforces that idea that violence is fine, that there is no limit to what you can push against African Americans in our country.
Absolutely.
Which certainly we still feel those repercussions today. Is there kind of a best practice that you would like to see with this kind of collection? Both, and I'm going to put this in two layers. One, from the antique stores themselves, when they come across these pieces, what in an ideal scenario would they be doing? And in case that they're not going to do anything and it takes collectors like you to get these off the market, what should we be looking at? Where should they be going?
It's such an interesting question, because like one of the thoughts I had was at one point I wanted to just gift all of these to like the Black Holocaust Museum, right? Shouldn't they really have this collection? And by the way, I don't know that it's not where it will end up. Maybe a piece or two stays with my family so they can share the same story that I had about my father. They can share what the collection their father had. There is a certain generational side to that I almost want to pay homage to my own father with hoping that I've taught my own kids the same lessons he's taught me. There are those antique dealers that won't take this product. They will not collect it. They will not share it. They will not do anything with it. There are others who are very astute business people and hold on to this intentionally, knowing that it goes up in value year after year after year. And they will intentionally only put out bits and pieces, the lesser ones, until they really only have the better ones. One of the antique shops I will not go to anymore because he has such a collection. And I believe that particular person is a racist. I actually believe they are collecting these because that's where their ideology is. So there is this strange conflict, because on one hand, I want to continue. I don't want to continue collecting for my sake anymore. I want to now start collecting for others. I want to start collecting for to either both to remove them from where they are in order to get them into better spaces, whether it's a museum or a school or whatever. And in some cases, because like I said, I'm very worried about who else is collecting these. Right there, it's that other world that's out there that's in dark places that is so scary to me, that they actually take these out to celebrate them. Yeah, it can't be there.
It's such a tremendous challenge because on one hand, the economy of antiques and collectibles is their rarity makes them valuable, and then you're investing. If they see you buying these pieces, then you're actually upping the value of the piece. So, and on the flip side, if they don't take the piece and they say, no, we're not going to sell this, then maybe it goes to someone who's even less scrupulous, so it's this incredible challenge.
There's a third option. The third option is a product will just be thrown away, right? It is possible that, unfortunately, and which is, part of me would like nothing more than to have this stuff just buried, just dead and buried, gone. But I have a problem with that because, I mean, as a Jew, I can't stomach that. I can't stomach the idea that we simply put, we turn a blind eye to that which came before us and don't recognize that this is out there. On one hand, on the other hand, every so often, how wonderful it would be if we could actually just bury all of this hatred. But
I think that's one of the big issues around the Confederate monuments. Aside from the fact that most of the way that they're placed in this country is kind of more of a glorious celebration that was erected in the 1920s, teens and 20s, as opposed to actually in the initial antebellum age. But that idea of, if we take this down and we disappear it, what does that say from an educational standpoint? So I think there are all sorts of big questions about how we engage this longstanding narrative around slavery, around race, around racism in our country, and what are the ways that we actually are taking it on, and is burying it the best, or disappearing it the best option? And I'm not sure it is. I think that just getting rid of it, whitewashing it totally, saying this statue of Robert E. Lee, or in the case of my sister's high school that her kids are district, that's the district she should go to, is Robert E. Lee High School. It is predominantly Black high school in Jacksonville. And they are actually voting right now about whether or not to change the name. And just the rhetoric around it is so, this is a legacy thing. This is about our heritage, as opposed to understanding that this is about race or at all. So I put that back at you. Do you think there's some sort of bigger picture of how we engage these objects without giving them the kind of glory that some people do?
There is it's a stretch, it's a reach, but I'll pose it. It's not far from book burning, right? At some point, the notion that somebody decides that this is something you should never read and therefore let's burn it, is really problematic for me. As a Jew, seeing those, we all have those black and white images of the books burning all over the place, and knowing exactly which books those were. I think it's imperative that, I'm not going to say every American child, but I think Huckleberry Finn is a story that should be told. There's something about that reading that I mean, for me, it's still one of those books I like going back to reading. I like understanding the world that was once, that was actually from a time period, and the ridiculous perspective that it's trying to share with us. I can't imagine a situation where, as a Black parent, I would want to drop my child off at the Robert E. Lee School. That is something about that is just so ridiculously vile to me that I can't. It's like naming Milwaukee Jewish Day School after Adolf Hitler. I mean, I can't imagine something like that. And yet at the same time, how do we teach that history if we didn't understand that that's in fact what this is really, what it was? That in fact, at one point, the South believed that this school should be named after a man that led that movement, that was part of all that. Conversely, the same conversation we're having now about Jefferson, same exact person. I mean, the pleasure was, and I really want to give him credit for it. Hamilton could not have come out at a better time, except for maybe today. I mean, imagine what would have happened if Hamilton came out in 2019 or 2020. the additional perspective it would have given us as Americans in an incredibly different time of our lives than when Hamilton came out, except that Hamilton isn't that old. And it still has such a magnificent story to tell us about how we should have to look back at history, right? What if, in fact, Hamilton was in fact a black man? I mean, it's not just the music, it's the story behind the music that really is, imagine what that would have been like. It's a very, very different space, and it's a different perspective. Every year, under normal circumstances, I get the pleasure of taking our Milwaukee Jewish Day School 8th grade kids to Israel. And we do a thing called Dig for the Day, where we go into these spaces that were buried for a host of different reasons, that are people's homes from approximately 1800 years ago, 15 to 1800 years ago. And every time we go into these basement areas and we start digging, we find bones from food they ate. We find pottery shards from their literally then plastic, or I should say now plastic, then pottery dishes. And every so often you find a perfect amphora, you find a perfect something from that time period. And the kids always know, can I take this? Can I take this? And the answer is no, you can't take these, because these need to be, sifted and found, and they have to make sure that they understand what this is all from. And at the end of the program, they actually get to go see a table filled with scrap that they can take any one of these pottery pieces. There's a really cool thing that happens though when we're digging, that either before, during, or after, I usually use it during or after, is I say to them, you realize that the last time any human hand touched this was between 1500 and 1800 years ago. And it's a piece of pottery. Now, I guess I'm asking any one of us, if you go home tonight to your favorite cup or your favorite Kiddush cup or your favorite plate, and it's now 1500 years from now and somebody's gonna find that, did it really matter that it was lost in that time? Or is it something that we should really respect, even if it's just somebody's plate that they had in their house? And I'm answering, yeah, we probably should. Well, al achad kama v'kama, as I say in Hebrew, then even all the more so. How much more spectacular is it that we actually get to hold on to a piece of American history that is so laden with, in this case, the stuff that I've got, such dark, horrific parts of our lives. It is more than just somebody's plate. It's some demented, sick, evil mind that decided to make that bank that allowed kids at our day school to think differently about the world they live in. It changed it. It's how you change lead to gold. It's how you make something that has real evil in it to become something that really will hopefully change a person's perspective on life. And that's what it's all about.
I think that's the thing at a museum, that we're always hoping that our objects have that kind of literal object lesson around them, that these objects transmit stories and those stories can change the way people feel. And so to that end, thank you for giving these objects new and different stories to tell, as opposed to this kind of legacy of racism and kind of the dark side of American history. I'm sure if you want, we can set you up with the America's Black Holocaust Museum. Sure. But this has been really profound. Thank you so much, Moshe, for sharing with us today. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add as we're kind of wrapping up here.
Several years ago, I worked as a docent at the Diaspora Museum in Israel, Beit HaTfutzot. And day after day after day, you do similar tours, and each docent has their own favorite spots they like going to. And on one particular day, I see a man, and there's usually, I was working a lot with teenagers, high school in Israel people up. So it was usually between 15, 17 to 25, maybe 30. And one particular day, I don't know, 56-year-old man joins a group very early on by himself. And you always have to worry about what the person is, what's he going to say or not going to say. And he joined us on a tour, and the second floor of the Diaspora Museum at that time had all these magnificent replicas of synagogues from around the world. And I'm going from replica to replica, and he's following with us from place to place to place, and he's leaning in, and he's kind of listening very carefully to the different stories I'm sharing. And I see that he's actually enjoying this, and I don't see him as a threat anymore. And then we get to the Altnai Shul, and he's now leaning.
That one's from Prague, right?
From Prague, exactly. He's leaning in significantly more. And I tell the story there about this particular synagogue is where the story of the golem supposedly happened at the top, where if you put the word emet in his forehead of truth, he would come to life and he would save the Jewish people. And if you erase the aleph, it would mean met, and he would die and he'd go back to sleep. And the story is told that Hitler spared that particular synagogue from destruction because he was extremely afraid of black magic. And therefore, the Altanai Shul was left as it was. And I'm telling story, and I've got several other stories I'm telling in this, and I can see his eyes just lighting up and his face is like really becoming really animated. And finally, he very meekly raises his hand. And I called to him, I took a risk and said, did you want to share something? He says, yes, can I come to where you are? I said, sure, of course. And he comes standing next to me and he puts his arm on mine and he says, guys, look inside there. You see those two seats right there, right by that, right there? That's where my father used to sit with my grandfather, who was the last rabbi of the Altanai Shul. Yeah.
It's not just about the objects, it's about the people and the objects.
Exactly.
And I think that's both the people who bought these objects, the people who can transmute the meaning of those objects. So thank you so much. Thank you for joining us for this conversation starter. You can see To Paint is to Live, the exhibit that corresponds with some of those Toggle images, until May 30th. So please come in and check it out. And if you have any other questions about Jewish Museum Milwaukee, go to our website, jewishmuseummilwaukee.org. Thanks so much for joining us today.